Welcome to the Como Vanguard podcast. This is Nick Knoth. I am joined by my co-host, David Lile.
Yes, you are. I'm just looking through
He's right
papers right here.
there.
He's still going through his notes.
And glad to be here. Looking forward to talking about the city council, most recent city council meeting, and anything else that comes up with our guest, who I know you'll introduce in just a moment. But before you do, are there any questions or is there any feedback from since we last met?
I don't know if
2
we
weeks
should
ago?
take it as a good thing or a bad thing, but we don't have any other questions or comments that have been submitted by listeners, and I will try not to take that personally.
Well, like you said, it could be good, it could be bad.
That's right. Well, as David alluded to, we are joined here, as always, by a very special guest. This time, we have Ward 4 Councilman and Mayor Pro Tem Nick Foster.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. I always enjoy listening to you guys, so I've looked forward to doing this.
Let's jump right in, because before Nick starts into some of these things, that we usually do these kind of chronologically, but I'm curious, as a council person, as you looked at last night's meeting prior to it and then post council meeting, what did you expect to be the most important? I'm not saying time consuming, but most important. And then what do you think, as media people, gets short shrift? And maybe this was more important than you all give it credit for being.
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know that I look at it that way. I honestly look at it as, what can I anticipate is going to take the greatest amount of time and effort to deal with? But if you look at it from just an importance standpoint, I'd point to the very first thing we considered in public hearings, and that's the CAPER report. This is something that happens every single year, but it's really, really important. And every year I say the same thing, that if you want to know what's going on in our city in terms of housing and homelessness, you need to read the CAPER report, because not everything that is happening in the city is there, but a lot of it is, and not just what the city is doing related to CDBG and home funding, but what others in the city are doing to address this same need. Because HUD wants to know, what is the context in which you're using this money from CDBG and from home, and that includes the work of many others in the city. And I think that is a really important thing to look at. But it is kind of overlooked. There were a few questions about it in terms of the numbers of what has been done in the past year and the amount of money that's been spent. And it's really important to remember that this is part of a 5-year plan. What comes in the CAPER addresses what our city has said to HUD we're going to do over the next 5 years. So it's a really important piece, but it's a lot of things that happen even in the consent agenda, which we might get to here today too. There are important things that happen here that often go overlooked. That's what I would say.
It's interesting, because I try, and by participating in this, I feel like it's a necessity to look at the agenda a day or two before the meeting starts, and I'll go through that. Well, I saw that report at the first of the meeting, and I opened it and I looked through it, but I think it's very hard for someone who doesn't study that or doesn't feel a responsibility for it. I looked through it. The one page that I have a tendency to copy things off, which I know is wasteful, but the thing that I copied off was the goals and outcomes, because I thought that was clear to me, actually, what the program was doing or had done. What else should I do to understand that as just a regular citizen? I'm glad these things are happening. I understand what you just said, but I don't feel really like it's that. I feel like it's too hard to understand sometimes.
Well, I think it's important to remember that this report is written for HUD.
Right.
And so they're asking specific questions. When you read through the report, you'll see specific questions that HUD is asking about what's going on in Columbia. And so what the effort is on the part of staff is to answer those questions. And some of that is going to be fairly technical, I suppose, in that kind of sense. So it's not really a report that's intended for the public generally. But this causes me to think about something else that is an ongoing challenge for us at the city, and that is communicating to the constituents, to our constituents, to the residents of the city, what's going on, what it means, and the importance of many of these things. And I know you all talked about this before, but we've had a conversation, and we'll start a communications department And part of the charge to that department is help us communicate all that the city citizens want to know to them in a manner in which they can hear it, in which they can take it in and understand it. And this is a good example of that. If you go back and look at the homelessness report that was provided 1 or 2 meetings ago, that one's a little bit simpler, and its intent was to report to council what's going on with homelessness, but also to, and I guess this was 2 meetings ago, also to say we want to do a 5-year strategic plan to address homelessness.
Mhm.
So things are a little bit clearer and more straightforward. Also, the caper, how many pages is it?
Well, I
It's
don't know,
long.
but
Yeah, it's long.
again, the page that I printed out, I think is a good summary of what you've done because it does
Yeah.
hit the high points, like City of Columbia HOA program used $120,000 in home funds for down payment assistance to 8 first-time home buyers, and then you can go on down the list. Woodhaven assisted 27 developmentally disabled individuals by completing home rehabilitations. Job Point assisted 29 students in 2025 providing vocational training. City of Columbia, $112,000 plus dollars on rehabilitation and energy efficiency projects for 6 households, earning at or below 80%. So, I mean, it's there. The questions that came up last night had to do with the second bullet point on this page that I'm looking at. Columbia Housing Authority helped 5 participants in the tenant-based rental assistance program. And the question was, why only 5 when the goal was, I think they cited 42?
Right, right. And I think there are a couple of things behind that. And honestly, I need a little bit more clarity on it yet. But I think the 42 really is a part of the 5-year goals. Also, it's important to remember, and I don't know that this was said, but I think Bill Rattah did say this. These goals are the city's goals. They're not hard and fast goals that HUD received from us and then anticipated that we would meet them. He also said that one was probably a little bit ambitious, and I think it was. But I think that looking forward, we can see that those numbers are going to get filled in over time. This is the first year of our 5-year comprehensive plan that we're reporting back to HUD.
Anyway, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, one comment I had going back to the very beginning of the conversations you two just had in terms of, if people want to see what's happening, look to this. I feel like it's almost a double-edged sword because you can look to this and it's all excellent things and I love it. And as a former member of the Housing and Community Development Commission who works on this,
Right.
I value it greatly and I know that significance, but I also look at it from another lens, which is numerically, it's still small, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
the number of people that you just mentioned in housing assistance or that Job Point helped or whoever, right? It's like we're not talking about directly impacting thousands of people, right? All those together, you're talking about low 100+ households, families, et cetera, which is meaningful and impactful. But I say that just to show, well, both to draw the contrast and also because I think that's probably one of the many reasons why this doesn't hit people's radar, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not likely to know one of the people that this positively impacted.
Yeah, you may not, and part of the reason that many of us don't know the people that are impacted, and that's one of the challenges we have in addressing this as well is helping people to understand the breadth and depth of the issues that we're facing in terms of being housed. It's one reason that I encourage people to read it. And remember, I know there are several $1 million that are at work here, right?
Mhm.
And it's not that much money. It seems like a weird thing to say, but if you put $1 million, $2 million into a housing project such as that CMCA is doing, or that Columbia Housing Authority is doing, that's just part of other millions of dollars that have to go into those projects to make them happen. So we have a part in that, but it's not the whole part. The other thing I'd say is that when you're talking about these numbers, I'd go back to what I said about what others are doing in the community. It's important to remember that the city is not the only player here. There are other agencies who are providing tenant-based rental assistance to people in our city. There are other people who are providing eviction prevention for people in our city. There are a lot of other things that are provided there. This is really primarily, and while the caper speaks to what many of those are doing, this is primarily a report about what the city is doing directly and directly about these funds. And I think that's important to remember.
So let me ask, this is David proves himself stupid moment of this podcast, but
Everybody's favorite segment.
you both, yeah, it is mine. You both have much more knowledge of housing and the situation. So if there are thousands of people in this community that cannot find affordable housing, why don't we have thousands of homeless people? Where are they? And what are they dealing with that we who do live our lives and are heartbroken to hear that exists, but at the same time we say, where why don't we see a lot larger number of people that can't find a place to live?
I think that a lot of people can't. This question goes back to what does it mean to have affordable housing? And what I would say is that that question is in part desirable housing. When I ran for office the first time, when I ran for council the first time, I knocked on a door in my ward in a part of town that I had lived in at one time, and I spoke for a good long while to the gentleman who lives there, and he let me know that his daughter was living with him too. Well, she was not too fairly recent graduate at Mizzou in health services. She had a very good job, but she could not find the apartment she wanted that she could afford. Now, this is somebody who's well educated and well compensated. They couldn't find the apartment they wanted. And that was a real light on moment for me. It's not just a matter of those who are at the lowest end of income and struggle to find housing, though those people definitely exist. There are people all along the spectrum that aren't able to move up into the kind of housing that they want to be in. So when you talk about thousands, we're talking about a lot of people who are there. There are a lot of families who can't find a starter home, so they can get into a home and begin to build wealth in that home that they own. So they stay in an apartment that they can afford and try to save money so that down the road they can find the house that they want to buy. This is one of the reasons that people are moving out of the city, because they can find more house in other parts of our county and outside our county. Actually, when we're looking at housing, we need to look across the spectrum at all levels of income, so that those kinds of housing that people desire are available to them. So when you talk about thousands, I think that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about people who are really literally homeless, in that case, we are talking about hundreds, and that's tragic in and of itself.
I'm going to say something that's going to sound, again, I don't mean it to sound like it's going to come out, but I'll say it anyway. A lot of people, I didn't have the house I wanted when I still may not have the house I wanted. And I understand you're talking about a different level of need or unhappiness than what I'm ever experienced. I understand that. But at the same time, I mean, there is that system of, y- I guess what you're going to say is we don't have what would be the starter house possibilities. But it's very frustrating as a person who drives around town and sees tons of rental places that are coming up. Some out there on going to soon be changed name State Farm Parkway, and other places that it's like regularly I have the conversation with myself and with my wife, who's renting those places if they're out of the price range of people who need to have a better place to live.
Thank you, Nick.
I told you this would be confusing.
Yeah.
Not for me.
I think the other part of it, like to Nick's point, right, is the domino effect of multi-generational households, because people can't move up, not moving up because you can't afford it, whatever it might be. But also part of it is people just become more, I'm blanking on the technical term, but the colloquial term is house poor, right? Where they're
House
living
what?
in
I didn't hear.
house
House
poor,
poor.
right? House poor, where they're spending the vast majority of their money that they make every month or every week on their housing and nothing else, right? So that is another aspect of this. And that number has grown significantly in terms of the disproportionate number of people who are spending over 50. I think it's 50% is like the threshold, one of the thresholds that is tracked. That's spending
So their
50%
housing
housing
cost
burden, cost burdened. Like I said, I'm blanking on the technical
Yeah.
term for it, but house poor is how I would generally describe it. And that's another aspect of this, because David, to your point, while you and I and the other Nick here can drive around and walk around, and there's always something for rent, there's always something for sale. The math of it is something you can't argue against, in that there's just not enough units to line up with our growth. Columbia continues to grow past the pace of development, and that has not changed. It's not necessarily gotten worse. I think, if anything, it's probably gotten a little better in terms of the number of units coming online every year, but it's still far behind the rate. And really, at this point, any development that happens is simply trying to make up for 3, 5 years ago worth of growth.
I'll give you a personal example. When I was living in Louisville, Kentucky, I lived in 4 different residences while I was there. The first one was a cracker box. I mean, a very small. There was a breeze that came through the bathroom window, but I was grateful to have it. But that's another story, because when I first got there, I had nothing, and so we moved from my then wife and I moved from that one into an apartment downstairs, which was just a little bit bigger and a little nicer. And so when we just moved up when we moved down, then we moved to another apartment, which was a little larger and had a second bedroom. because we were anticipating having a child, and that was important. After that, we moved in finally into a cottage that was lived in by a friend of mine, but we rented all of these places. What what we're experiencing here is we might have stayed in that cracker box longer because somebody downstairs in the better apartment's going to stay there longer because they can't move on to the next one, and then so on and so forth. And so that's some of what we're experiencing here. And even if we're building some of the higher income, apartments and others that are going to be for higher income folks, it's like what Nick said. That makes room as people move up into the house chain, as it were.
Why doesn't the market drive the kind of construction that is needed? I'll answer my own question because people can't make a profit off of it, I suppose. But again, it seems like there is a possibility that you could.
Well, the costs are increasing. That's one of the main things. And yes, so people who are in the business usually have a tendency to do what people in business do. They go where they can make money. And you can make more money generally on a higher end home for lesser effort and input than you can on smaller ones. But there are people who are interested in doing this. So one of the things that we're putting into place is small lot consolidation, or it's not consolidation. What's the word, Nick? It's anyway, it's essentially making smaller lots available for construction. That reduces the cost of doing that, and this goes to the starter home question. If you can build smaller homes on smaller lots, then you have the opportunity to sell those for lesser money. And it is a challenging marketplace, largely because of the cost of construction in and of itself. And then you throw in the challenges that some people have with having a workforce that can do that work and so forth. It's a challenging time for developers. And so this is part of our conversation. Even last night at the end of the meeting, we were talking about getting input from those people who are doing the building, who are doing the construction. We're getting that, but what my colleague Don Waterman wanted to do was be sure that we're getting that. And I agree with him. If we're making changes in our fee structure and our licensing procedures, we want to be sure that they're effective and that they make it more efficient for people, and then so less expensive for them to build, and so they'll be more likely to build.
Yeah, I think ultimately, and I apologize for folks who are listening. I'm not at full speed today. You might be able to tell from the
We're
sound of
here to
my
push you a
voice.
little bit.
Yeah, I'm a little under the weather. Housing is just one of those issues where there's 100 variables that have brought us to this point. Everything from the cost of material, the lack of skilled labor, cities planning and zoning processes and challenges there, utility costs, interest rates, all these things. And they've all combined to equate to a lack of affordable housing. But however you determine that word, we don't have enough of it. I don't really care where somebody draws the line. 200,000, 250, 300,000 for a starter home or whatever, what have you. There's not enough of them. You can go look right now anywhere in Boone County, and there's not many of those. If you want to spend 400 plus $1,000, there tends to be plenty of those homes sitting around, but not as much on the lower end. But
But
again,
even not as many of those as has been true in the past, I think.
right, certainly more though.
Yeah.
In my
Well, I'm
experience,
going way
yeah,
back. I mean, this problem started, I think, around 2008 primarily with a housing crisis that happened there and
right.
people stopped building. So we're dealing with an issue that's been in the works for many years, and
Yeah,
it's going to take a while to dig ourselves out to build our way out of it.
certainly the tempo never picked back up.
Right.
And here we are now. We haven't had a shortage of other issues or crises occur since then that haven't helped. But I do look forward to the city's efforts on this. I know, as you mentioned at the end of council meeting, and we're kind of jumping around a little bit here, that council member Don Waterman and Valerie Carroll had raised issues with some housing topics. On Waterman's side, he expressed a desire for seemingly a task force, is how I would describe it, to take the city county housing study from 2024 and figure out a way to streamline the implementation of it. It was my interpretation.
Well, I think he was really looking for more input from builders, the people who are actually doing the building,
Mhm.
and that's developers and builders. But I've been asking this question of people for a long time. Actually, if I ran across somebody who is in that business, I would say, "What keeps you from building the built housing that we need to see?" And over again, some of this was from a guy who worked on my house, but other people, and I started asking this question before I was on council. It and over again, what I heard was that fees and permitting are really difficult within the city. And part of that I just sort of chalked up to, well, it's a pain in the neck, so they don't wanna do it. But I think I think it merits looking at. We need to be sure that we're doing this in a way that's efficient and that makes it possible for them to do the work that we need for them to do. I'm not gonna build these houses.
Mhm.
People who build houses are gonna build the houses.
Well, and I just want to take this moment because it's timely and relevant, which is part of it also, as I'm sure you've heard this from builders as well. I know I have, is the unpredictable nature of going through the city's process, all the way to the fact of you get these permits, you get the zoning you need, you get the plans, everything, and then council votes you down for something you couldn't predict and that isn't on the books, right? Ashford Place comes to mind
Yeah,
earlier this year,
right.
a lovely multifamily housing project. Everyone on council agreed with that sentiment and then voted it down for unrelated infrastructure issues. Right. So
Well,
that's a
I think those now I voted in favor of it, but
right.
I think that for those who voted against it, there was not it was not unrelated. It had to do with road infrastructure in particular being able to serve that community. And there was a dispute. There were different opinions about what the traffic study showed or
Mhm,
didn't show that had been done some years previously and whether it was still effectively in place and so forth. So I understood their point of view. We just
mhm.
ended up on different sides of the boat.
And I'll clarify. I say unrelated infrastructure issue because it wasn't the developer's responsibility. There was a road was not being expanded in time by the city to meet the concerns of traffic flow for this new subdivision that would go in.
Right.
The developer had no responsibility
Yeah.
for it,
And so
and so
this
their project died. However, for now,
now,
right, and
right.
they had no like, they were not guilty of any failure,
No, they did
right?
what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that and there's this conversation around that is when did the roads get built? And our
Mhm.
city's uh, approach to this has been to follow the development. So the roadways are going to lag a little bit behind in many ways, but it's an ongoing issue.
Mhm,
And part of the question is, well, do we start building roads a little bit further out or what? And in that area, you're also talking about our interacting with the county as well, because there are county maintained roads in that same area and whether or not whether we do something or whether the county does something, how we work together to make that happen. All of these things are a part of it because part of this is WW that would feed that development
mhm,
from as a more primary corridor.
right,
That's a county maintained road, and people say it needs to be widened. Well, that's not ours to do it. It's the county's role to do that. I suspect one day we'll see it, but it's not immediately ahead of
yeah.
us.
I have
Ultimately, it's just the unpredictability, right? If you're a developer who has to
Right,
plan these things 18, 24, 36 months in advance, and you hit every green light you're supposed to, the way you're supposed to, and then city council, for valid or invalid reasons,
right.
uh, denies your project, all you can do is throw your hands up and be like, "Okay, well,
Yeah,
you know, I guess I'm not doing that."
and there are costs incurred in
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah, I have two questions before we move on to something else. One is in regard to what you're just talking about. Out on Sinclair Road, near the newly built elementary school that's being built, and also the middle school out there across Sinclair, there's a development there. Now, those roads seem to be built before that was built up. And then also, why would that have been improved when the traffic on Sinclair Road, which is already bad because of the cascades out there, and then the other access to that development, which is, I can't remember what the name of the road is, that it's hilly and very narrow. I mean, that got approved. So
Yeah,
that is consistent with the inconsistency of predicting what will happen.
well, that's well within the city limits, which I think probably had something to do with that, and that approval happened just before I came on
Yeah,
council, so
it's
while
been
I
a
was
while.
following it, I didn't get involved in the depth of it, but I think that's probably part of it. Part of it too is that they were developing the kind of things that the city wants to see. There's some level of mixed income and mixed use in that area, and, the idea is to provide a more walkable neighborhood, which is pretty significant in that part of our city, down in the Fifth Ward, south of town.
Then my other question is, and then we can move on. You're talking about the fees and other matters that add on to the cost of construction. Is there a study that has been done? If I want to build a $250,000 home, how much fee and licensing or whatever I'm going to have to figure into that. How much for a 400,000? How much for a half a million? How much for a million? Do we know what those are? Because I've heard the same thing year after year that developers and construction companies say is, geez, I'm hammered by either rules, restrictive, which, okay, and that's going to cost to meet those, or fees. So do we know? I mean, I'd like to know how much that adds on to each level of construction.
I'll just say I do know that exact number exists. I certainly am not going to remember that in my current state.
Nor I am
I
my
do.
usual
I am
state.
quite confident that both the city and the Home Builders Association has that information, and it is several $1,000s per development in terms of per individual house.
Tap fees and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. And it's about provision. The city provides infrastructure to where that development is happening, and then
Hmm.
it's up to the developer to. Now, when in new development, greenfield development, the developer is responsible for a lot of that. Is for a lot of that, placing a lot of that in place as well, even though it becomes part of the city's system. I can't. Give you the numbers exactly, but I think that some of those are just pretty standard. So it's not necessarily, and this is one of the challenges, that the value of the home that you're building is that you're building a home and you have a tap fee for that.
As a consumer, I would want certain things that the city requires. I would want them to say new construction needs to have this level of insulation or this level of X, whatever it is. As a consumer, I would want that. Are we advocating that if I'm a consumer, I should be able to choose what I want and what I don't want rather than the city requiring that? Maybe saying if you're looking at a $200,000 house, we'll let you cut corners on some of the things that we have required of a double that price house.
I think that would be pretty difficult to do.
I
I
think
think
so also.
I think
Yeah.
the only thing the city is doing that's even remotely in line with that comment is, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is the consolidation of the lot sizes and setbacks for infill development and for cottage style development on new land in terms of letting houses be closer to each other and smaller, etc. Probably the only responsible way of going about it on that end of the conversation.
But when a developer or a construction crew says these things are restrictive to me that can sound like, and again, I'm not criticizing them, it can sound like I want to cut some of this corners out because I don't want to build a house that might be 21st century smart.
Well, one of the things that's at play right now is the energy efficiency codes that we're going to put into
Yeah.
place. And part of the resistance to that among some is the costliness of that. So you've got the value to the consumer in this case, because they would have lower energy bills and so forth, not to mention that there are fewer greenhouse gases being created. But you've got the cost to the builder to do that, which gets passed on to the
That's
consumer.
my point.
So that,
Yeah.
yeah, so this goes back to what you were saying exactly. But I don't know that we could say, well, you'll use the, what is it, 2000, you'll use the 2018 codes and you're going to use the 2025
Right.
codes. And that would be impossible, I think, to really manage it.
Well, I'll add,
Mhm.
just because you brought up the building codes, especially on the energy efficiency side
Mhm.
of things, it is noteworthy that the international building codes and their newer versions have walked back
Right,
some of those energy efficiency standards because of the significant costs
right.
it has passed on to home builders and therein home buyers. And so even the International Building Codes Commission, who takes these things very seriously, is themselves walked it back in the last two editions because of the negative impacts it's had on housing affordability.
Right, right.
Yeah.
What do I want to move on to? I'm housed
Well,
out right now.
we'll move on to
Our
something
audience maybe too.
much a little less complicated. I think the council last night greenlit their half of a $1.5 million revenue guarantee to secure American Airlines flying from Columbia Airport to Charlotte, North Carolina. And was it just Charlotte, or does this also cover Denver?
Charlotte.
Just Charlotte.
Mhm.
And a lot of people came out and spoke last night in support. We saw the Columbia Chamber of Commerce speak. We saw representatives from Ready. We saw some folks from the Airport Advisory Board. Of course, Mike Parks, airport manager, spoke. And, I thought this was something that is not controversial. That's something the city's done before, but it did get pulled off consent for some, I would say, clerical reasons to
Well, not really for clerical reasons. It came off consent because a single constituent asked that it would come off consent.
Sorry, I'm thinking of the other airport one that got pulled off.
Oh well, that one has to do with
That's
the
the
cost of
kitchen.
building the kitchen.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
that's the one I was thinking of that was more clerical
right.
in correcting something, but you were correct. This one got
Yeah.
pulled off because somebody had a concern with it and then didn't show up to council to talk about it. But Nick, what are your comments? You
Well,
guys
let me ask
unanimously
before
supported
the
it.
councilman starts to answer that.
Yeah.
It was the person that had a concern thought it was too much? Was
I
that
think
your assumption?
the concern was, and I
That it was
understand it. The
anything?
concern was about the city's subsidizing a private business, essentially.
Which it's done many times in regard to the airport,
We
because we've done that before,
we've
which
done
was pointed out in the meeting last night.
Right, we've done this and to great success, actually. I think one of the challenges we're facing as a community, I think the airport is, as I think about this right now, is a great example of the challenges we face as a community. Our community is growing really fast, and if I heard Mike Parks, our airport manager, right last night, we're the fastest growing airport in terms of enplanements. That is the number of people who are getting on a plane and flying out here in the country. And it's no wonder we've added just in the last year flights to Denver, another flight to Chicago, and in June we're adding Charlotte, Destin, and the Orlando area. And now those are limited in the time numbers that they're doing, but we're talking about pretty much doubling the number of enplanements over 2 years ago this year. With the new, I think the new terminal makes a big difference there. But we're going to see several things at the next meeting and have several public hearings around the airport with related to parking and the kitchen that you talked about, because we're still hopeful we'll have a for real restaurant at the terminal and so forth. But these are the opportunities that are being given. But it has been done before, and Mike talked about the uh, the agreement we had when American came to Columbia back in 2012. These same kinds of guarantees were in place, and he said we ended up paying out. There was I think a $250,000 guarantee, and we ended up paying out $23,000. It is time limited while it establishes itself. But he said that was really paid off of the interest we earned off the money that had been
Right.
set aside. We have a good record here, and it does impact business development and quality of life. There were several people, including me, last night, who said, "Looking forward to that direct flight to Charlotte out of Columbia."
All right, let's talk about this a little bit more because first of all, I have great respect for staff because I think they present very well. And Mike Parks did that very well last night. I learned a lot from him when he's talking about how there could be 300 airports competing for one route. People need to hear that
Right.
and say, well, then how did we get that? Well, he and Randa Rollins, who is the head of the airport commission or whatever, they spoke of going to these meetings and you have to sell your community. So we were talking before the microphones, or you two were especially talking before the microphone about how that took up probably the most time of the city council meeting other than the end comments. As I watched what that was happening, I thought that was all sort of a presentation from the community who made comments as well as the council to say we are dedicated to this, and American Airlines or United or whoever else might want to look at what we are saying about this and how we support this. So I thought it was a show, not in a negative way, but it was a show of support.
It's an indication of the support that the community
So
has.
that's why they all came out to talk about that. I didn't think there was any way that this wasn't going to pass because I think that it has been something that people have wanted, as pointed out last night, for a long time. And anybody who doesn't realize the importance of that airport, there are a lot of people who have never driven out to the airport. You should go out there and see how many vehicles are parked there. It is amazing. And there are few parking spots except on the very fringe. And people even, I came back. We use that airport a lot. I came back from Norfolk, Virginia on Sunday, and it just never seems there's a lot of people using that airport. So my question is, adding a flight to Charlotte or to wherever, is there a limited pool of flyers? And by adding a flight to Charlotte, how many do you take away that are flying to Chicago or Dallas now? I don't know if you can quantify that,
Yeah, I
but
bet you've
somebody will,
done it.
because
You know,
what you're banking on is new customers using a new flight instead of driving to St. Louis or Kansas City,
Yeah.
which I will admit there will be. But at the same time, it's like if I open another new restaurant in town, what customers am I taking from other restaurants in order to get them to come to mine?
I'm not an entrepreneur, and there's a reason I'm not in business. But the people who are know that you've got to have a business plan, and part of the business plan is you're determining how many customers are you going to have, and you do your groundwork to be as sure of that as you possibly can. So I know that you mentioned that American Airlines heard from us about the kind of support that's going to be had here, and that our community is going to have, and I'm very confident about that. I'm quite confident too that American Airlines worked also to check other metrics that they have access to, and they came to a determination that they were going to do this. Mike said last night, airlines are not given much to, and he didn't put it this way, but they're not given much to just trying a route and seeing if
Right.
it'll work, because there's some expense on the front end of doing that. There's expense in an ongoing fashion to doing that. And so have a tendency to put flights in where they believe they're going to be successful. So I assume that Americans done that, and that they'll see it. I think it is far more like, I have flown to the Southeast going to other airports. And part of that is just the cost and the convenience, really. You always do the math, right? I've got to spend this much time getting to the airport. It's going to cost me this much to park and fuel and stuff. But I have done that. It's less likely that I'm going to do that now when I can fly out of COU and go to Charlotte.
But again, I've been using the airport to go to North Carolina
Yeah.
through Chicago or
Right.
Dallas. I will
Yep.
now use it possibly to go to Charlotte.
Yeah.
So I'll be one less person on those other flights.
Well, I'll
And there are a
say,
lot of other people who will do that also.
Yeah.
But there'll be new people, I guess. I mean, that's, as you're saying, they've done the study. They can figure that out. But
Yeah.
again, it is a factor because you add one, which will take away from another, possibly.
I think that's part of the equation.
Yeah.
Right. But again, this is why I'm not in business. I can't take that kind of risk.
as somebody who flies in and out of our airport a few times a month, those Chicago flights, Dallas flights, they're always packed.
No.
I'm shocked when I get on a flight and it's not. Like, it's highly unusual. So I suspect with adding Charlotte or anything else, they'll still be packed. There's not enough seats on those things anyways. But I also wanted to point out or just note for our listeners that, this $1.5 million revenue guarantee, which exists to offset the potential loss
Right.
of revenue by American Airlines. So they will not guarantee this money. It's if they don't hit predetermined goals in terms of people booking these flights. Only half of that is coming from the city's transportation sales tax. The other half, the other 750,000, is coming from an amalgamation of the county, other municipalities nearby,
MU.
including Jefferson City, MU, and other business interests,
Right.
which again is reflective of what we're talking about, right? This is not just the city of Columbia courting and holding the bag alone. This is a regional effort that it takes to make this happen. I'm confident this will be successful. I know I will be on a flight to Charlotte sometime this year for work, so I'm happy to see that coming and look forward to it for sure. But yeah, I don't see it as controversial. And spoiler alert for anybody who was surprised that or is surprised to hear that American Airlines or an airline service of any kind is being subsidized by tax dollars. There would not be an airline in existence in America without subsidized tax dollars. Yeah,
What
they
I
do
thought
not exist without it.
it was also interesting to hear Mike Parks talk about the reality of that's one flight a day and how frequency is the desired outcome and end of this, like more than one flight to Denver,
Right.
more than one flight to Charlotte.
Right.
But you have to prove that one works before you can add on another one. I thought that was an important reality of what he was talking about, which makes sense also. A question though, I understand, and everybody said this last night. You said it, I think, and the people who spoke in the public hearing talked about, when are we going to go to Charlotte? When are we going to go to Charlotte? An interesting question that I've heard in my household was, why was Charlotte the target there for the Eastern target? Why not Boston? Why not New York? Why not Washington? Why not some other place other than Charlotte?
Well, I've wondered about Atlanta for a long time.
Yeah,
and
Atlanta could be the
we used
other
to be
one.
able to fly to Atlanta out of COU. I think when we first moved here, it was a Delta flight, as I recall.
Mhm.
Then Delta went away. So I don't know the answer to that either. I know that Charlotte, I think, is a major hub for American. And so that's I'm sure a big part of the reason. If you fly to Charlotte on American, you're going to have far more other connections that you can make to other destinations
On the
than you
same
would if
airline.
American flew to Atlanta. And so it's about feeding their system as much as it
Mhm.
is that particular location.
United is that Atlanta? Or someplace, I can't remember what,
I can't
mm.
remember where their primary hub is.
All right,
I
man,
wanna say
anyway,
Chicago,
that's
but I'm not
it's a
sure.
good enough answer for why Charlotte, and
Yeah.
that's again what I kind of tried to explain.
And if you were talking if it
Was
were Delta we were talking about, I bet you it would be Atlanta because
Delta,
that
Delta,
is a
not
major hub for
United.
them.
I'm sorry, Delta. That's what I
Yeah.
was thinking of. Delta.
Atlanta,
Yeah, yeah,
big
yeah.
time.
That's what I was
Mhm.
thinking of. Not United. I was
Yeah.
wrong
You know,
airline.
and somebody told me last night this is big for the SEC, and I said, "Well, if you really wanna get people from the SEC here, then you need to go to Birmingham. That's where they're headquartered." So I would love that. I have a lot of family in the Birmingham
Oh,
area.
let's go back to when we were sold on the fact of joining the SEC. The travel to these places isn't much different than going to the Big 12 schools. Come on, what are we talking about? Why do we have to fly? We can drive. Don't get me on the SEC decision because that was false. That was false then, and it's still false
Yeah.
now.
A little false advertising, perhaps, but
And not a part of the
well,
agenda last night.
well,
No, it wasn't.
no, not this time. Well,
And an Alabaman trying to sell us to travel to
yeah,
fly into Alabama.
a little
Yeah.
bias there to be sure. We'll pivot away from the airport. Look forward to seeing that. Those flights start in June, I think.
June, mhm,
So we'll see how that goes. I'm sure a year from now we'll have a really good picture of success
or
or
maybe
failure,
sooner.
or sooner even, knowing how the airport's been growing so much. The next one I want to touch on because I think it's just a fun topic. Is last night the council increased their stipend.
I saw
Now,
this coming.
yeah. Now, for folks, I want to make sure everybody is very clear on this. City Council approved a 9% increase to their stipend. Two things there to know. That does not take effect until May 2029,
Correct.
which means that every single person currently on City Council would have to get reelected before they would reap the benefits of that vote. Right. So there's a little trigger in there that they didn't just put money in their pocket tonight. And for folks who are like, "Oh goodness, I wish I could give myself a 9% raise," who wouldn't? In this case, we're talking about the mayor's stipend. It will increase from $10,545 to $11,494, and that's per year, folks. That's not like per month. That's annual income for the mayor. Council members, like Councilmember Foster with us today, his stipend and his colleague stipends will increase from $7,030 to $7,663. My question, Nick, is what are you gonna do with that $600?
Well, I feel a little more comfortable about buying a cup of coffee when I meet with somebody, or a cup of tea in my case, actually. Well, I think it's an interesting and it's a fun topic. I want to say on the front end, I can't imagine anyone running for council because of the money. And there are expenses that you incur as a council member, small things like driving different places and having lunch with somebody or whatever. Those are expenses that come into play there. But I think it's the appropriate thing to have a stipend for council. Beyond that, there is the conversation about whether or not council should be full time and should be paid in that way. And there are people in our community who believe that that should happen. I think there's a lot of viability to that argument. It's also important to remember that this only started in 2011, and
The
that was
stipends.
the stipends, and that happened with when it was just established in the charter. The charter was changed to allow for it. They didn't start being paid until 2014. So we've only made this adjustment, and it's based on what it's not a random number that the council comes up with, the staff comes up with. It's based on the increases that have been given to employees over the previous 3 years. So in this case, it adds up to that percentage and that amount as a result. But there was one year in which over a 3-year period, and I looked at it just last night, but I think from 17, 18, and 19, that amount was over 3 years, 0.5%, because the employees had not received any increase in 2 years. And the year previous to that, I don't think they had received anything. And they only received 0.5% there. The reason that it's higher now is because we've addressed the issue of employee compensation. And that's not so that we would see an eventual increase for the council. It's because of the importance of paying our staff in a way that we can hire and retain the folks that we need to do the work that needs to be done. So there are several elements to this, and really the least significant in my mind is the amount of the increase that's going to take place. Is the stipend absolutely necessary? Absolutely not. No one's going to run for that. But it is nice to have. I mean, it is nice to have a little bit of compensation for the work that you do. And this could easily, for those who choose to make this a full-time job, it's a full-time job.
Well, you brought up the subject of there's always this is nothing new, right? Every year there's folks who talk about should city council be full-time, and maybe not even full-time, but should we just pay them more, right? So that they can spend more time doing perhaps what people
Well,
are
not only
already
that,
expecting them to do.
yeah, but also so it makes it possible for other people to
Right.
run.
Right, from
That to me is the most
accessibility.
significant issue.
Yes.
Absolutely, right? Because I mean, if you look at council right now, I mean, I'm just going, let's go 1 through 7 on council, right? First ward representative, I believe she has a day job, works for the university last I checked.
Right now,
Right now.
she's not.
Okay.
No. Right now, she's not. She is not working in a full-time position.
Okay. And then we've got Ward 2, Valerie Carroll. I believe she works for
Ward 2's Vera Elwood.
what did I say?
You said
I
Valerie.
ever said Valerie Carroll
It's
again.
okay. You're a little under the
I'm
weather.
sick, guys. I apologize.
I'm here for you. I'm here
I'm
for
glad.
you.
So Vera Elwood, she works for the Center Project.
Right.
Last I checked. So she has
That's
some
right.
type of employment outside city council. Ward 3, Jackie Sample, also employed.
I'm not
some
certain.
degree.
Yeah, I know there's been transition for her, so I'm not exactly
Yeah.
sure what Jackie's doing right now.
Employed to some degree, or
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
Ward 4, you retired.
Correct.
This is your day job, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Ward
And-
5, Don Waterman, he's retired as well now.
Correct.
Although when he started on city council, he was still working a day job.
He was.
And he's since retired. And then Ward 6, Betsy Peters, she's been retired, I believe, as long as she's been on city council.
I think that she's. I think she was doing a certain amount of work at the beginning.
At the very
Like she
beginning.
was still teaching and that kind of
Okay,
thing, but I'm not
yeah.
absolutely certain of that.
But certainly at this point, given her length on council, she's been retired for the majority of her service.
I think that's right.
And then we have the mayor, who I believe does not hold a day job, so to
No,
speak. I
she
don't
does
think
not.
she does.
No, this is her day job.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, but if you look at that, the majority of city council are folks who do not hold a full-time,
Right.
let's say, traditional employment, right?
Right.
And I would think a lot of that is because it would be hard to do. It's hard to do city council and have a full-time day job. As someone who did that at one point,
I was about to say.
it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
And most employers don't want you to doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I agree with you. And I'm certainly somebody who's of the mind that city council, I think the full-time discussion is a separate debate from the pay, from the compensation.
Yeah.
I think those can be two separate things.
Sure.
I think city council's compensation should be higher. I think it should be reflective of working part-time and not.
I agree. And
Right.
if it were, I was about to say, if it were a compensation that reflected a good part-time job,
Mhm.
I think that would open the door for more people to do it, because there are people who are in the gig economy, or they could do another part-time job and piece together an income that would be sustaining for them. As it is now, it just is not.
Mhm. Absolutely. And the full-time use subject, again, that's a whole other thing that would
Mhm.
require a lot more discussion and changes to the city charter than is currently perhaps seriously being considered, although I know there's some parties out there who have different opinions on that.
Sure.
But I'm curious, again, from your position, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, I guess it's two separate questions: full-time versus what it is now, part-time, in reality volunteer, because you're not paid, it's a stipend.
Right.
And then the other question of where should the pay be and what should that look like?
Or where should the pay be? It's really an individual question, isn't it? I
Mhm.
think that I've been in the position of doing part-time jobs while I did other things. I've done part-time jobs while I was a student. I've done part-time jobs while I had other part-time jobs. I guess that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, and the economy has changed, and people's approaches to income have changed. So I think that putting together some part-time positions, which could include service on the council, could be fine for some folks. Full-time versus part-time, sometimes I'm envious of the people who are working because
Mm.
they're confined by that work in a way that I'm not. And so I think that I have a tendency, sometimes there's a tendency to do more because I can. I've
Mhm.
got that kind of flexibility. And so it's kind of hard to really make a you're not punching a clock, so it's kind of hard to keep up. I have kept up with my hours before, and I was surprised at how many hours I was putting in over a 2-week period. So it kind of depends on the person and how efficient they are in the work that they do, and it's kind of a part of their issue. For them, it's about how much time do they want to give. And as I said, you can give as much time to the job as you're willing to give.
So, and I would know this number if I wasn't sick, 'cause I'm gonna use that as an excuse. How many people roughly are in every ward?
A little over 22,000.
Lower 22,000.
Yeah.
So I asked that for reference because I know, just for comparing to other elected offices that are part-time, Missouri House Representatives, part-time legislature, those representatives, they kinda sorta work full-time January to May, not really. Well, they represent about just a little under 40,000 people per House district across the state.
That's less than I would have thought.
Roughly, right? Obviously, not
Yeah.
every district's exactly even on that, but you're looking at just under 40,000 people. So if a council ward has how many did you say?
Just over
Just over
22,000.
20,000. So let's
Now
say
that is
half.
of a few years
So
ago.
let's say half of a House district. Well, those House reps are making 40-ish thousand dollars a year, working that part-time plus benefits, and per diem. I'm just using this as context. I'm not saying this is what the city should do or what should happen, but just for context.
Yeah.
Well, by that kind of comparison, you would think, okay, well, city council members working similar hours year round, unlike our state reps and senators, should perhaps be 20,000, right? Plus, for comparison's sake.
Right.
It's obviously not a one-to-one, but I just think, again, in terms of something else of another elected office that is part-time, that, you know, I would argue a municipality spends a lot more time actually governing than the state house does, is a good place to start the conversation, perhaps,
It pretty
for
much is.
inspiration.
Yeah, I've had people to apologize for me for bothering me on the street or whatever. I just have said, look, it's 24/7.
Yeah,
It really
exactly.
is because you're just always available pretty much. I guarantee what would happen if this became a serious conversation is somebody would begin immediately looking at comparative cities. So
Mhm.
Lawrence, Kansas, what are they doing? And then just kind of go on from there to see because they're people who've already established this kind of thing, and I think that would be where I would start.
Yeah.
I know that I've spoken to a couple of council members in other places, and they ask what I make, and and then there's a look of shock on their face about that. But again, this is not why people run in Columbia. It's not for the money, but it is about opening the door. In my mind, it is about opening the door for other people who would be very capable at doing this work, but simply cannot because of the need to have an income
Yeah. Well,
to support them.
and as somebody, I acknowledge I'm a bit of an anomaly amongst folks in terms of how much I am passionate about city council and city hall and having the best city government we can get. I see it also as folks in general expect or assume that their council representatives are informed on everything.
Right.
Everybody wants them to come to their event, even if they don't go to someone else's event. All these types of things, right? To your point, it really is 24/7. I know city council, you're getting text messages from DeCarlin Seawood, city manager, in the middle of the night or something happens, for example. If you want folks to be able to give that capacity, you need to make it to where they can have that capacity available. And to your point, especially if there's someone who's not retired or near retirement and you need income, right? You need to be able to pay your bills. And if you want to be able to serve the folks, you're excluding a whole lot of people from being able to serve, even consider serving because of that pay. And I'll also add just to your comment of looking at sister cities, which is always a good idea. There's also a mixed bag on this subject because you look at Springfield, Missouri, they don't get paid. They don't even get a stipend, right? They make $0. But then you have other cities who make six figures as council members, and it's all over the place. Is my point. But
And I think comparatives, comparables are really good things to do. I think at the end of the day, or at the end of the conversation, you decide what's appropriate for us.
mhm, absolutely, I agree. David, any comments?
No, I really don't. I understand arguments and suggestions both ways. I only have one thought, and I haven't thought this through yet. That is, if you make a job more appealing for example, a city council person, more appealing position because of salary, then those who will decide to run for that position, will they be also targets of influence by people who will say, oh, okay, you want that job badly now. I will help you get that job if you will give me something in return, should you get that job. I don't know if that would happen or not, but I think that that is the politics of elected officials. And right now, it takes less, although I understand you can use the example of the last mayoral race and how much money was spent and raised for that. But I'm throwing that out as an anomaly because of who was running in that race. But I just wonder if you say I'm putting a value on this position, then those who want to see somebody in that position will put a value on it.
Yeah.
And
I think I don't disagree with that. It's certainly a concern amongst others, although I would argue, and maybe I'm a little pessimistic on this as having been a candidate myself, it's already happening.
true.
Well, that's exactly what
But
came to mind for me.
that's like the what happens with athletes in college. It had already been happening that
Mhm.
people were slipping them
Right.
some benefits before NIL and paying athletes ever came about. But does it need to be that blatant?
Well, I'll just say I don't know if anybody's interested in my name, image, or likeness, but I might be interested in having a conversation. We could talk about it. I don't know of anything like that, but I think that's happening now. I think it could happen now. I don't know that what the council is paid makes a difference. I know that I look ahead to the time when I'm no longer in the council, and I'm quite confident that as soon as I'm not on the council, I'll get far fewer calls and far fewer emails, not because I'm not on the council, but because I ain't on the council. It is a place of influence, and people want to have a relationship with people who are in places of influence. I think that's true right now. The stakes are pretty low in that regard, although the stakes are pretty high in terms of what local government does. It really does have an impact on where people are and what's happening in our community every single day. And it's different in that regard than I think the state house or the state senate, or certainly at federal level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I was just thinking.
Yeah.
I'm
no,
not saying it would happen. I'm not saying it
devil's
would not,
advocate of
and I'm
nothing
not saying
else.
it doesn't happen now.
Well,
That people want to influence what decisions you make.
Well, do a search right now, really quickly, and you'll find that there are people who've been subject to that and have given into that in cities around the country, in small places where nobody's paid, but there's money at work. I think
Yep.
it's one of the reasons that it's important. Transparency, that oft-used word, is very important, and it's important that the city is doing a really good job of explaining, here's what's happening with the money that we have, because that's where I could see that it could be problematic if somebody finds a way to game the system and to enrich themselves in the process.
See, the argument what you could have come back at me at, not getting paid very much now would indicate a better opportunity to bribe somebody.
Mhm.
I mean,
Maybe.
again, I was just thinking through.
Maybe.
And one thing that you said, I know we need to end this because we're probably running out of tape. But the other thing is that
Are we running out of tape?
I'm
I
just-
understand the
I'm-
tape is endless.
that's a reference to an old time radio guy. So
know what
you're
you're
talking
talking
about you're talking about clarity and what's the word? It's just escaped me. But being able to make sure that people understand how the city does its business. I thought that the presentation and the ordinance that was talking about relating to purchasing was pretty interesting, just
Yeah.
because that hits upon that. And I thought the mayor's
Yeah.
question was a good one, and I hadn't ever thought about it, but they were talking about the bidding threshold from 15,000 to 25,000. Okay, I understand that. I'd have to think about it more, but then also about how somebody might have a new iPad or a new computer, and how do you know that they don't sell that for personal gain and then put in a requisition for one to replace it because they had lost it or something like that. That was kind of an interesting conversation, because the question, as I understood it from the mayor, was make sure that we have openness to know what's happening with purchases that are being made in the departments.
Well, and as I understood that question, that was really about equipment that has aged out.
Right.
And about making it available to our employees so that for their personal use, and being careful that no one buys that and then sells it for their own personal gain. So in that case, you're talking about something you get legitimately, but really the only reason you're buying an iPad so you can sell it on eBay. And that's not what we have in mind. And with this, it's to make technology available to uh, employees that they can still get further use from.
I thought that the response from the staff member who he was saying, we do want to know whether somebody is passing these on.
Yeah.
And then I liked the conversation after that that was saying we'd like to take that technology that might be out of date for our purposes and give it to others who could use it and still make valuable benefit
Yeah,
from
this
it.
used to happen. I used to be a part of that when I
I
was at
bet you
Voluntary
did.
Action Center,
Yeah.
Homes for Computers. The city basically gave computers for us to distribute to people in the community who had no computer at all, and it
Yeah.
was a major gift for them. Really aimed at children in school and
Liked
where they have
knowing that
technology.
was happening.
Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap it up here, folks. This has been the Como Vanguard podcast. If you were listening and were unaware, this is the companion show to the written publication available on Substack. And for all things Como Vanguard, whether that is submitting questions to us or comments, which we really love, let us know. You know, send us a comment. How did Nick Foster do? Were you happy with his with his
Uh,
answers,
Or not.
or our part? Let us know what you think. We really want you to send us things in. CoVanguard.com. You can find everything you need: the written publication, the podcast, a place to submit questions, things like that. As always, Nick Foster, Councilman Nick Foster, Ward 4, Mayor Pro Tem. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on here.
No,
Thank you
great to be with
for
you.
based off the conversation we've had, thank you for being willing to serve our great city.
Oh, it's really a joy. It's a joy often enough I find joy in it. Yeah.
Nick Knoth, thank you for organizing and heading these things up, and I hope we don't catch what you have.
Well, me too. Oh, one last thing for listeners. This is an opportunity for feedback too. Hey, would you like us to have, I think they're called bumpers, where we have like intro music and outro music? Someone suggested that maybe we should do that. I know that's a thing. If you want us to do that, let us know. If you want to be the one who makes it for us, even better. Send me some suggestions. This is this is very much a DIY type of show, so we appreciate anything and everything from listeners. But with that, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.